Well, I think we'll start. So, dear all, welcome to today's reality check webinar. Are you US customer and global partner ready? This is webinar number 2 in our USA Next reality check series. And today you will be able to engage with a variety of healthcare customers and potential partners from various parts of health and life science industry and the care sector. This activity is part of a cluster collaboration project between Norwegian Smart Care Cluster, and we have Therese Oppegård with us, and Oslo Cancer Cluster with Jutta Høigs, the Life Science Cluster, Hanne Mette Dyrlikstansen, and Norway Health Tech, and Trine Radman, that's me. So the USA Next is funded by Viken County Municipality. It's very nice to see you all here today. I just have to tell you all that this webinar is being recorded. So USA Next is a project between the 4 health clusters in Norway. And we are working on different levels, doing different things together to make it easier for Norwegian health companies to get into the US. So why USA Next? USA is the largest global market in health and life sciences for partnership and investment. In the US, you will find the highest ranked academic medical centers globally and the leading hubs for biopharma, diagnostics, devices, and digital health and digital tech, also globally, and the smartest hospital in the world you will find in the US. So the aim of the USA Next project is to provide a roadmap to the US market for Norwegian health and life science companies, and to optimize our US partner network to support Norwegian companies along the way, and to professionalize Norwegian companies at an early stage. So today, this webinar is a part of that aim. So this is something we are collaborating quite closely with, and we are trying to get synergies, networks, expertise, and joint opportunities all together. The 4 clusters, we have more than 500 unique members altogether, and we work on with different networks and different partners in the US. So we are very happy to see you all in this webinar today. So based on that, I think I will just give the word over to Jutta, which will be today's moderator.
Thank you, Trine. And now it's my pleasure to welcome our expert panel joining us today from London, Chicago, and Cleveland. And thank you, Becky, Franziska, and Tom, for your willingness to share your expertise and insights with us today. You bring a broad variety of complementary competence and insights, and we really look forward to the discussion and one-to-one feedback to the companies that you are giving later during this seminar. So I now invite you to briefly introduce yourselves. So let's start with you, Becky.
Thanks so much, and thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this panel. I'm really excited about it. My name is Becky. I actually sit in London, United Kingdom, so work within the European ecosystem on a day-to-day basis. My background is in research, so I had a 12-year bench research career between academia and industry. I'm a PhD trained neuroscientist. And after I did some work in early target validation, research and discovery, I decided that I really enjoyed the biotech world a bit more and jumped ship to venture. So I did venture investing in Europe for 4 years, working with seed and early stage companies, everything from target discovery through phase 2B, sitting on boards and working closely with management to help them get themselves ready for those exits on the venture side. Over this past year, I joined Eli Lilly, which is a US pharma, one of the biggest pharma in the world, and I sit on the venture sciences team, which is part of corporate business development. My job is to work with companies at the cutting edge of innovation in therapeutics. We also have some non-therapeutic strategy, and our job is to work with companies in order to bring them into the organization. We're looking to buy assets. We want to partner. We want to support the ecosystem in all different kinds of ways. And so I think one of the comments I was asked to make is, what does it mean to be partner ready for us? And so that's actually is my job. So my job is to work with all of these early stage companies and to get everybody ready. And ready to me means you can sit down at the table with our search and evaluation colleagues who are specifically going to be either talking about partnerships, acquisitions, licensing, and you can have all the answers that you need to have, or at least know what answers they're going to be looking for ahead of that conversation. And so thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. And we dive into some of these aspects later during the panel discussion. So then we are moving from London to Chicago. So Francisco.
Hi, everyone. Francisco Rasa. Thank you for the invitation. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It's being recorded, so I think everyone around the world can watch this later. So I work at AbbVie, so we're also a large pharmaceutical company, multinational pharmaceutical company. So we cover a lot of different therapeutic areas. So I sit actually within a group called Digital Sciences, and I head up search and evaluation for digital sciences. So I am within R&D. So my remit actually is to look at digital health technologies. So anything DHT, it could be digital therapeutics, digital diagnostics, and place those within our clinical trials primarily. So we're really focused on developing novel digital endpoints and looking at ways to use digital for label claims, so for primary, secondary, exploratory endpoints within our trials. I mean, ultimately, to help our patients. There's a lot of information out there as far as, and hopefully we can share this regarding what readiness looks like for AbbVie. So I'm really excited about the conversation. Thanks.
Thank you, Francisco. And now we move to Cleveland with Tom, who really represents a lot of insights from the hospital sector on this panel, among broader insights for the industry, of course. So Tom.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you. I'm Tom Sudo. I spent 14 years working for the Cleveland Clinic, a large academic medical center. A large part of my role during that time was outreach to international companies who were interested in working with the Cleveland Clinic. That led to working with a number of companies to make them US ready, to bring in, including traveling around the world, doing seminars and symposium on US readiness. As part of what I've been doing now after leaving the Cleveland Clinic is working with companies again around the globe, trying to make sure they're ready. So before they even go to see Becky and Francisco, you know what you're getting yourselves into, and doing a lot of reality checks. So, and again, as part of my work at the Cleveland Clinic as well, I worked with another 125 hospital networks in trying to work with them to introduce them to international companies as well. So a lot of experience in the space, a lot of headaches in the space, and even some successes.
Wonderful. Yeah. So the three of you really represent very complementary insights and expertise covering the different types of products that are also being developed by the different Norwegian companies that we have in this webinar today. So you already pointed to some of the aspects during your brief introduction. So let us then go a bit deeper into these key aspects companies have to prepare for, to be ready for when they start to approach you as partners and customers. So we won't cover everything in this relatively short time now, but which ones would you like to highlight? So what are the ones that you really would like to stress, especially towards early stage companies who are looking to become ready? So maybe Tom, you go first now, because you say you prepare them for. Oh, Francisco has a hand already. Yeah.
I'll let Francisco go and I'll follow Francisco.
Okay, good. So then Francisco.
Yeah, definitely. On the pharma side, around digital health and digital sciences, I mean, specifically with my job, because we're placing and we're partnering with companies going into our clinical trials, as far as the route to pharma, there's a couple things I think that everyone should consider. First, I mean, many of the companies out there now, large companies and small, they follow basically the V3 framework with DIME. So that's the Digital Medicine Society. So, looking at, is your tech, is your digital health, is it both, it goes through verification, analytical validation, and clinical validation. So you really have to hit those three things. So we really, like other types of assets, I mean, we really like to look at things that are de-risked. Have you completed clinical validation, right, or scientific validation? If yes, that's great. Let's continue the conversation. Then probably the next stage gate are the regulatory approvals, right? If yes, let's continue that conversation. Ultimately, I mean, then we look at whether or not your DTX or your digital health solution, can they demonstrate like really something useful either for AbbVie or for our patients, right? So those are like really, really big buckets that you have to pass by, but those are things that we look in specifically as you get further through the different stages of clinical trials. I mean, if you're going through a pivotal phase 3, I mean, we really want to see all those things. So those are some really large paths and that you should generally follow, and not just I think United States, but generally as you're looking for digital health and digital health tech within big pharma.
So Tom, would you like to go next?
Sure.
Then?
So I think what Francisco said is very important. You have to be ready to come to the United States. Just because you think you have a good idea doesn't mean you have a good idea. What is the science behind your idea? Clinically, how does it work within the framework of healthcare and how it's being delivered? The United States is a huge market, both in geography and also in just who's in the market. So there's academic medical centers, there's community medical centers, there's clinics, there are doctors' offices, there are any number of companies like AbbVie and Eli Lilly. I mean, it's big, and you have to be prepared. Norway is a little bit more contained. What have you done in Norway? Have you gotten a market in Norway? Have you proved your science in Norway? Can you show that what you're doing is actually making a difference? In today's healthcare, unless something is considerably cheaper and considerably better than the gold standard that exists today, it's not going to make it to market. And you got to be able to prove that. Just because you think you've got a good idea doesn't mean you have a good idea. That's one. Two is you have to be prepared to speak to the American market. You got to understand how they think. You have to understand the language. You have to understand what they're looking for. A month ago, there was a big healthcare conference, the JP Morgan Healthcare Conference. All the companies were at that conference. I always go and look at what was said by their CEOs who were there. What are they looking for? Where are they going? Where's Eli Lilly going? Where's AbbVie going? Where's any of the companies going? What are their next targets so that you can fit into where they're at? That's what they're looking for. The last thing I'm going to mention is the most frustrating, I'm going to call it frustrating to me personally, is that over the last 15, 20 years, it has shifted. Companies and even venture capital would invest very early stage. Not anymore. They want things as de-risked as possible. So that may mean even being in market before they'll look at you. Doesn't mean that they're going to not talk to you along the way. It means that they don't want things, they want it as de-risked as possible. And I went through that with a number of companies. They kept moving moving the milestones a little bit. We got after FDA, after we got the market, then we had serious conversations. So you got to be prepared, try to get success in your own hometown, and really understand the market and what the market is looking for.
Yeah, thank you. You point to a lot of really important homework points. And Becky, would you like to compliment? You also worked as an investor and you followed the field over the years. So curious to hear what you point out.
Yeah, I would say I echo some of those same points where I think, the key, especially on the therapeutic side, is going to be understanding what your therapeutic hypothesis is. And Lilly is science first. So we want to know, what is the therapeutic hypothesis? Who are you trying to help? And why do you think you're going to be able to help them with your approach? And then we want to see the data to support that. And from a stage perspective, like I work on Lilly Ventures, so we might be able to go a bit earlier than a partnering discussion. But again, that looks like investment. And so part of the question is, when is the right time to approach for a partnership or a collaboration or a licensing versus sequencing how you enter that market from a venture capital versus a pharma collaboration standpoint, and who is the right person in an organization to talk to at any given stage, because there may be a venture group that like the one that I work in versus a collaboration who's going to be search and evaluation closer to what Francisco is doing. And so understanding kind of how different parts of an organization work together is a key piece of that. But I think, when you go back to the fundamentals, it is always going to be about, do you have the data to support what you think you're trying to do? And how are you different from everybody else in achieving that goal? And I think the differentiation is always going to be key for us, because, especially with validated targets, with ideas on how you could stratify patients, there's always going to be a few people in the ecosystem working on similar ideas. And what makes you stand out? What is your differentiating factor? What's your secret sauce? And I think if you can speak to that, that helps us come to the table and have that informed conversation about, what we might be able to do together.
Yeah. So within digital health, and this is across probably all healthcare, at least what the FDA calls out as specific aims. They are basically to enhance healthcare access, to lower costs, and improve health outcomes, right? So regardless of your tech, regardless of your biologic or your molecule or your asset, if you can hit any of those three, aims that the FDA actually calls out, I think really understanding that and who your actual your target is, right? Be it a provider, be it a D2C customer, a payer, a biopharma employer, hit one of those and hit it strong. So.
And you all stress, of course, scientific and clinical evidence, and to show that it works. And I think this is something that companies really, of course, also do and try in their home market. But you also point to these, like, you have to be considerably cheaper, considerably better, be outcomes focused. And I mean, there are differences in how the system works and how different buyers look at technologies than in the US compared to, for example, Norway or the European market. You have any advice or any learnings that you would like to share when you dealt with European companies, and where you see some gaps or where you see they have difficulties to get this like entry point or the right information?
So again, I think an emphasis, science makes the difference. Can you show your science? The second thing that really makes a difference is the clinical pathway. How are you impacting patient care and patient outcomes? If it's just another test, I'm going to have to run all the same tests I'm doing anyway, it's not going to go anywhere. How do I disrupt the clinical pathway enough to make a difference? Ultimately, as I've said, I'll repeat this 1,000 times, patient outcomes, healthcare outcomes, how does this improve care? Second thing, in Norway and in most of Europe, it's a single payer system. In the United States, it's not a single payer system. Though, if you can get Medicare and Medicaid CMS approval, you can move things along. So who's going to pay for this? And how is it going to get paid for? I see a lot of things. Oh, this is a major savings in time and effort. Prove that. You got to have that proof. The other thing is, yeah, go back.
No, it's fine. I was gonna kind of jump on top of that and say, part of that is also the regulatory landscape in the US versus the rest, versus Europe, because we have the FDA, which it does things quite a little bit differently than some of the European health regulatory agencies. We need to be aware of what those differences are. And I think the other piece is that what that feeds into is how those drugs are approved, or how your tool is approved by those agencies also impacts how it fits into the commercial landscape for a given company. So if in some cases, if your tool hasn't been part of a clinical trial, you're probably not going to get access to the path to patients on the commercial side of things, because that hasn't been approved through that regulatory agency. And so there's a little bit of homework that is going to be specific to every company, and I mean startup company, not to a big pharma, about how your product, like Tom was saying, fits into the regulatory landscape, fits into all these different pieces, because without that knowledge about where you actually need to enter the system, you're not going to be able to like just put your cart on the horse once that horse is already off to the races. You're going to have to be in from the get-go in a lot of cases.
Yeah. So I'll just add on to that. Actually, one advantage of European companies versus the United States-based companies is that I've dealt with companies that basically have, for example, 510K cleared tech, right? But they're not CE marked. So for us, a lot of times the import-export is really difficult. So having that CE mark is really important, right? So there's something there where, you don't necessarily have to have a 510K if it's for research only, right? For in like early clinical trials, but having a CE mark absolutely helps. Just for us as far as import and export. So that's actually a really good thing on the European side.
So I'm going to add something else. And I think Francisco's right. We having both sides, but if you can get the CE mark first, be in patients, show clinical utility, that's a big jumping point. The other thing I'm going to tell you is a little secret. Eli Lilly, AbbVie, the Cleveland Clinic, all know your business better than you do. Do not try to come in and fool us. We know who's in the market. We know what's going on. We know how to read scientific reports. And I see a lot of this where people come in and say they know our business better than we do. You may know it better than I do when I was at the Cleveland Clinic, but there's a whole lot of doctors that know it a lot better. So come in, you have to be humble and you have to be accurate. They're going to know when something's not right. Just because something works in rats doesn't mean it works in humans. In fact, I've said many times, I want to come back next time in my life as a rat because they've cured everything in rats and mice. It's got to show that it works in humans. It's got to show that it's effective, that it's safe, and that, again, that it's fitting in the clinical pathway and it's saving money in the long term and saving patients' lives.
And I just add one thing is that one of the advantages that you have as a European company, I think in my experience, is that it is easier to work within the health systems on the research side to get that clinical, validation, let's say, be it with different doctors or through clinical trial systems that are, I think, easier to access because of they're centralized in the European communities. And so I think that's one advantage that you have, is that being able to bring that data it may be harder to fundraise, it might be harder to get to that point, but you have actually many more opportunities to get into those points than a lot of the US companies that you'd be competing against. And so that's a huge advantage, that if you can really capitalize on what the centralized health systems have to offer to early stage biotech, I think that makes a huge difference when you're having those conversations later on.
So I think here we had some really relevant points for our companies. You point to some advantages they have in the European system that they can really exploit. And I think that's a really important take-home message. So use all these advantages, be as prepared as possible, ensure you are CE marked, ensure you really work with like your local or national clinicians, get all this validation to really come with like a very solid package, right? And then make sure you very early on get also the right advice for regulatory, etc. elements. And I mean, what you just mentioned also, Tom, was being humble, be accurate. Sometimes it's also, I think, this perception that European companies have to change the way that they approach US partners. Of course, they have to be prepared whom they are talking to, but we also briefly tapped into this like presentation style. And I think when we are now at this, like, be humble, be accurate, do your homework. So I think, Becky, you also mentioned that you sometimes even feel it's better to work with European style presentation, right? So
Yeah, I think, there's a difference between being able to tell your story thoroughly, accurately, with all the right information, and being slick to the point of trying, as Tom was saying, don't try and fool us, don't try and sweep things under the carpet. We're going to know if and when those things happen. We're going to find out. And so it's best, like having that information up front and being you offer, I think is really the key. And I've found in my experience that because in the US there is a lot of that culture of pitching and selling, a lot of the companies that come to us from Europe are actually much more real. And I think that it's nice because these are always relationships that are built on real people.
You can also build out a US infrastructure. So if you're in early stages of research, find research partners in the United States who can work with you. So a university, a hospital who will help you with basic research, getting people involved early. Start to think about scientific advisory boards that include doctors and scientists from the United States. They can help you. And again, we all scout major conferences, presentations at major conferences work, poster presentations. Just make sure your IP is correctly protected before you go. But that's great ways to get in front of audiences, and I think that builds your momentum in the United States.
How early should companies really start to look for US research partners or broaden their advisory board or scientific board with US representatives? What would be your advice?
Early in research, if you can find people in the United States doing comparable research to what you're doing, I think you can do it as early as need be. And again, that also allows there's a lot of grant funding available in the United States from the NIH and others. There's European money available. There's money available for European companies that work in the United States. That's all non-dilutive funding. And you can get the basic science done. And that starts to create a buzz in the United States about what's going on. And then, I would look at finding people in the United States who can help coach you to come in and, to work on your presentation a little bit to make sure that it meets the needs of the United States. Again, not too slick, because we all know slick now. But, can you compare? Do you know who your competitors are? Do you know who else is in the market? And it can also help you sort of focus in on where you should be going.
Mm.
Listen, I have pitched to Eli Lilly on behalf of companies. I've pitched to Avi on behalf of companies. Wasn't successful in both. In one case, I was successful. In two cases, I wasn't successful. Again, and that's a major healthcare system in the United States with an idea. So it's a hard road, but you got to be prepared for it.
Mm.
I think
Becky?
the other thing I was just going to say is like on the success, the other thing is I think we see hundreds, thousands of ideas on a regular basis. And so just because you're not successful the first time, I think the other thing is like there is value to some persistence, especially if you're coming into a market that you're not as familiar with, coming forward when you think that you're ready, but then being willing to say, okay, we'll take your feedback, we'll go back and take this and integrate it, and then come back when you've answered those questions and have that data. So I think, to Tom's point of like, you may not be successful the first time, that you may not be successful the second time, but it's possible, the third time. And usually the people you're working with, like I said, they are people. And so they'll give you that frank feedback of you will have another chance to present this if you answer those questions, or, really, if you come back next time, that's going to be it. And so I think there is a bit of that, take the feedback and be willing to come back. So it's the humility and like some vulnerability in the sense that like, it's never meant to be it's never meant to be personal, that feedback. And it may feel personal if people are saying, oh, well, you could have done this better, or we need to see that data that you don't have, but it's never meant to be personal. It's always meant to help the company get to that next stage in a way, because the better you do, the better we do, the better patients do. So it's all for the betterment of the system.
Mm.
I think as far as on the segment that you're selling into or you're looking to, I think I would say providers actually, I mean, they are the largest share, right? I think Rock Health, it was last year, I think it was like 53% of the entire healthcare market, right? As far as on the funding side, like, so providers are the big one. selling into them, I think. Second, I think, is D2C. I think pharma only accounts for like 13%, right? And I mean, again, like the bias against pharma is that we're always looking for assets that are truly de-risked, right? And in order to do that, it actually takes a lot of time and a lot of money. So the question is, how do you get to that point? So many times, at least on the digital health side, they have two business models or three, right? D2C, B2B, and also to pharma, right? Because the road on the pharma side is a little bit longer, I believe, and and the evidence is actually a little bit more strict for trying to get into clinical trials than trying to approach a provider. So, so I think that's a big distinction. And again, the size of the market, hospital systems are much, much larger as far as the size and total healthcare spend. That's where the biggest share of the market is. So, I'd really think about your business model and see who you're really targeting. And, the approach is actually different between payer, provider, pharma, employee. Like an employee benefit plan is totally different, right? So I would go through and really look at your business model when you're approaching the United States, because it's really fragmented.
Yeah, and I think that was an important point, and also a very good introduction to the next part of the program that we start now. So you started to talk a bit about go-to-markets and whom to approach and which. So
I will just share with you the next step in this series of webinars. At least if I can find the yes, this one slide. But thank you all for the input and questions and feedback. With a special thanks to the panelists, of course, participating in the early morning from the US and also from London. You have all given very great input and shown impressive knowledge. And we hope that the outcome and the takeout from this webinar will make the roadmap towards the US a bit easier and more effective, maybe, and understandable for the companies. So we will. This is a reality check webinar, and the next one coming up will be in April, and that one is called "Are US Public Funding and Partnering Ready?" But before that, next week we have partners coming in to Norway and to Oslo, and meeting with Norwegian companies from the Norwegian companies from Oslo region, but also they are from Minneapolis area or Minnesota area. And then we are going to South by Southwest, and it's possible for everybody to sign up to be a part of that. Tech for Social Good, it's a part of the Nordic Council of Ministers. And then we have some workshops and training for the companies before we have a delegation visit to Minnesota this spring, 31st of May until the 2nd of June. And then we have the Bio International Convention, and that one is going on in Boston from the 5th to the 8th of June. And this is what is happening in the spring. So with that, I will just, on behalf of the USA Next project team, say thank you very much for participating, and also for the great input from all of you, and especially thanks to the panelists. And as you can see in this picture, it's Therese Oppegård. We have met Trine, me, Jutta, and Chelsea, but she has been replaced today with Hanne Mette Dyrne Christensen. So thank you very much, and on behalf of all of us, I will say goodbye.